The year was 1887, and the American frontier was still wild and unforgiving. In the dusty town of Cedar Ridge, Colorado, where the wind carried whispers of broken dreams and second chances, a story was about to unfold that would prove love could bloom, even in the most barren of hearts. What happens when a terrified orphan girl, forced into marriage with a stranger, meets a lonely rancher and his motherless son? Sometimes, the smallest hands can hold the greatest power to heal. If you're ready to discover how a child's innocent question changed 3 lives forever, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because this story will touch your heart in ways you never expected. The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt outside the Cedar Ridge General Store, sending up a cloud of red dust that seemed to hang in the air like a curtain between past and future. Through the grimy window, Eleanor Whitmore pressed her pale face against the glass, her green eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resignation that had become her constant companions over the past 3 weeks. At 19, Eleanor had learned that life rarely offered choices, only circumstances to endure. The letter crumpled in her trembling hands bore the neat handwriting of Mrs. Henderson from the Denver orphanage. Mr. James Crawford of Cedar Ridge requires a wife to help manage his household and care for his young son. The arrangement includes room, board, and a modest allowance. Your train fare has been provided. Eleanor stepped down from the coach, her worn brown dress catching on the rough wooden step. The driver, a grizzled man with kind eyes, handed down her single carpetbag with unusual gentleness. "You sure about this, miss?" he asked quietly. "I could take you back to Denver, no questions asked." Eleanor shook her head, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. "Thank you, but no, I have nowhere else to go." The main street of Cedar Ridge stretched before her like a gauntlet. Weathered storefronts lined the dusty road, and curious faces peered from windows and doorways. Eleanor had grown accustomed to stares during her years at the orphanage, but these felt different, not cruel but cautious, as if the townspeople were reserving judgment. Eleanor Whitmore? The voice was deep, measured, and when Eleanor turned, she found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the very mountains that surrounded the valley. James Crawford stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard labor. His dark hair was touched with premature silver at the temples, and his brown eyes held a wariness that mirrored her own. "Yes, sir," Eleanor managed, her voice barely above a whisper. James studied her for a long moment, taking in her thin frame, the careful way she held herself, and the fear she couldn't quite hide. When he spoke again, his tone was gentler. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge. I'm James Crawford." He gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby. "The ranch is about 5 miles out. We should get going before the afternoon storm hits." Eleanor nodded and allowed him to help her into the wagon. As they rode through the town and out into the open country, she stole glances at her new husband. The marriage ceremony that morning had been brief and businesslike, conducted by a tired-looking judge who seemed more interested in his lunch than the vows being exchanged. James had been polite but distant, and Eleanor wondered if he regretted his decision to send for a bride. The Crawford ranch appeared gradually as they crested a low hill. The main house was larger than Eleanor had expected, a 2-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and sides. Outbuildings dotted the property, a large barn, a chicken coop, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse for ranch hands. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said softly, and she meant it. After years of cramped dormitories and grey city streets, the open spaces and mountain vistas took her breath away. James glanced at her, surprised by the genuine warmth in her voice. "It's home," he said simply. As they pulled up to the house, Eleanor noticed a small face pressed against one of the upstairs windows. The face disappeared quickly, but not before she caught a glimpse of curious dark eyes and tousled brown hair. "That would be Tommy," James said, following her gaze. "He's shy around strangers. His mother died when he was 3, and he's not used to having women around. Eleanor's heart clenched. She understood what it meant to lose a mother, though her own memories were hazier, softened by time and the protective fog that sometimes mercifully clouds childhood trauma. James helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag to the porch. Mrs. Patterson from town has been helping with Tommy in the house, but she has her own family to tend to. I thought, he paused, seeming to struggle with the words, I thought it would be good for him to have someone here full time. Of course, Eleanor said. I'll do my best. The interior of the house was clean but sparse, with the practical furnishings of a man who valued function over beauty. James showed her through the main rooms. A large kitchen with a wood-burning stove, a sitting room with a stone fireplace, and a dining room that looked rarely used. Your room is upstairs, James said, leading her up a narrow staircase. Tommy's is at the end of the hall, and mine is... He gestured vaguely toward the opposite end. We'll respect each other's privacy. Eleanor nodded, understanding the unspoken boundaries being established. This was a marriage of convenience, nothing more. Her room was small but comfortable, with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. As James set down her bag, Eleanor noticed a small figure hovering in the hallway. Tommy, James called gently. Come meet Eleanor. The boy who appeared in the doorway was perhaps 5 years old, with his father's dark eyes and a serious expression that seemed too old for his young face. He wore patched overalls and a blue shirt that had seen better days, and he clutched a wooden horse toy against his chest. Hello, Tommy, Eleanor said, kneeling down to his eye level. I'm very pleased to meet you. Tommy stared at her for a long moment, then looked up at his father. Is she staying? Yes, James said. Eleanor is going to live here with us now. The boy's expression didn't change, but Eleanor caught a flicker of something. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just curiosity. He turned and disappeared back down the hallway without another word. Give him time, James said quietly. He's been disappointed before. That evening, Eleanor prepared her first meal in the Crawford kitchen. She'd learned to cook during her years at the orphanage, where older children were expected to help with all manner of tasks. The pantry was well stocked, and she managed to put together a simple but hearty dinner of beef stew, fresh bread and canned peaches. James and Tommy ate in relative silence, though Eleanor noticed the boy stealing glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. She tried to engage him in conversation, asking about his wooden horse and whether he helped with the ranch work. But his responses were limited to nods and shakes of his head. After dinner, James excused himself to check on the animals, leaving Eleanor to clean up. She was washing dishes when she became aware of a small presence behind her. Do you know any stories? Tommy asked, his voice barely audible. Eleanor turned, drying her hands on her apron. I know a few. Would you like to hear one? Tommy nodded solemnly and climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs. Eleanor sat across from him and began to tell the story of a brave little rabbit who helped a lost fawn find its way home. As she spoke, she watched Tommy's serious expression gradually soften, and by the time she finished, he was leaning forward with interest. Did the rabbit ever get scared? Tommy asked. Oh, yes, Eleanor said. He was very scared sometimes. But he found that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing the right thing, even when you were frightened. Tommy considered this gravely. Papa says Mama was brave when she was sick. Eleanor's throat tightened. I'm sure she was. And I think you're brave too. I don't feel brave, Tommy whispered. That's okay, Eleanor said gently. Sometimes the bravest people are the ones who don't feel brave at all. Over the following days, Eleanor settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent her mornings tending to the house and garden, and her afternoons helping with whatever tasks needed doing. James was unfailingly polite, but maintained his distance, treating her more like a hired housekeeper than a wife. Tommy remained shy, but Eleanor began to notice small signs of progress. He would linger in the kitchen while she cooked, sometimes offering to help with simple tasks. He started leaving his wooden horse on the kitchen table, as if marking his territory in her domain. And every evening he would appear for story time, gradually moving his chair closer to hers. It was during her second week at the ranch that Eleanor discovered Tommy's secret. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sound of quiet sobbing coming from the barn. Following the sound, she found Tommy huddled in an empty horse stall, tears streaming down his face. "Tommy, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Eleanor asked, kneeling beside him. "I had a bad dream," he hiccuped. "About Mama. I dreamed she came back, but then she went away again." Eleanor's heart broke for the little boy. Without thinking, she gathered him into her arms, and to her surprise, he didn't pull away. Instead, he buried his face against her shoulder and cried as if his heart was breaking. "It's okay to miss her," Eleanor whispered, stroking his hair. "It's okay to be sad. Papa says I need to be strong," Tommy said between sobs. "Your papa loves you very much," Eleanor said. "But even strong people need to cry sometimes. Even your papa." They sat together in the quiet barn until Tommy's tears subsided. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but calmer. "Will you tell me about your mama?" Eleanor asked gently. Tommy's face lit up, and for the next hour, he regaled Eleanor with stories about his mother. How she sang while she cooked. How she made the best apple pie in the county. How she would read to him every night before bed. Eleanor listened with her whole heart, understanding that this little boy needed someone to remember his mother with him. From that day forward, their relationship deepened. Tommy began seeking Eleanor out throughout the day, chattering about the ranch animals, his favorite hiding spots, and his dreams of becoming a cowboy like his father. Eleanor found herself falling in love with his bright spirit and gentle heart, and she began to understand what James had meant about needing someone to care for his son full-time. But it was James himself who remained an enigma. He was never unkind, but he kept himself carefully guarded, as if afraid to let anyone too close. Eleanor caught him watching her sometimes, when she was teaching Tommy to read, or when she was singing while she worked. But he always looked away when their eyes met. The breakthrough came during Eleanor's third week at the ranch. A late spring storm had blown in from the mountains, bringing with it driving rain and fierce winds. Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard Tommy scream from upstairs. She raced up the stairs to find the boy's bedroom window had blown open, sending rain and wind whipping through the room. Tommy was cowering under his bed, terrified by the thunder that crashed overhead. "It's okay, sweetheart," Eleanor called over the noise, struggling to close the stubborn window. "It's just a storm." But the window latch was broken, and Eleanor couldn't get it to stay closed. Rain was soaking the floor and Tommy's bed, and the little boy was becoming more frightened by the minute. "What's wrong?" James appeared in the doorway, having heard the commotion. "The window won't close," Eleanor said, still fighting with the latch. James quickly assessed the situation and moved to help her. Together, they managed to secure the window with a piece of rope. But not before both of them were soaked through. "Tommy, come here," James said, kneeling by the bed, but Tommy shook his head, too frightened to move. Without hesitation, Eleanor crawled under the bed beside him. "Remember the story about the brave rabbit?" she said softly. "He was scared of storms too, but he learned that storms always pass. They're loud and scary, but they can't hurt you when you're safe inside. Promise?" Tommy whispered. "I promise," Eleanor said, "and I'll stay right here with you until it's over." James watched from the doorway as Eleanor comforted his son, something tight and painful loosening in his chest. He'd been so focused on protecting himself from further loss that he'd forgotten what it looked like to truly care for someone. The storm raged for another hour, but Tommy fell asleep in Eleanor's arms long before it ended. When the thunder finally moved on, James helped Eleanor carry the sleeping boy to the guest room, since his own bed was still damp. "Thank you," James said quietly as they stood in the hallway. I haven't seen him that calm during a storm since his mother died." Eleanor looked up at him, seeing something vulnerable in his expression that he'd never let show before. "He's a wonderful boy, James. You should be proud." "I am," James said. But I'm not sure I'm enough for him. I don't know how to give him what he needs. You love him, Eleanor said simply. That's the most important thing. James was quiet for a long moment. His mother was the one who was good with feelings, with comfort. I'm better with practical things, fixing fences, managing cattle. I thought bringing you here would fill that gap, but Eleanor prompted gently. But I didn't expect. James struggled with the words. I didn't expect to care about what happened to you, too. Eleanor's breath caught. In the dim hallway light, James looked younger, less guarded. For the first time since she'd arrived, she saw not just the practical rancher who'd sent for a convenient wife, but the man who'd lost someone he loved and was afraid to risk his heart again. I care about what happens to both of you, Eleanor said softly, more than I expected to. They stood there for a moment, the admission hanging between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Then James cleared his throat and stepped back. We should get some rest, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, cleaning up after the storm. Eleanor nodded, but as she turned toward her room, James spoke again. Eleanor, what you did tonight, staying with him, making him feel safe, that's not something I could have done. Thank you. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had washed the world clean. Eleanor woke to find Tommy sitting on the floor beside the guest bed, playing quietly with his wooden horse. Good morning, she said, sitting up. How did you sleep? Good, Tommy said. The storm went away just like you said it would. Storms always do, Eleanor agreed. Are you hungry? I could make pancakes for breakfast. Tommy's face lit up. Mama used to make pancakes on Sundays. Then pancakes it is, Eleanor said. As they made their way downstairs, Eleanor noticed that something had shifted in the house's atmosphere. The careful politeness that had characterized her first weeks at the ranch had given way to something warmer, more genuine. James was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing and eggs gathered from the chicken coop. He looked up when they entered, and Eleanor was surprised to see him smile. Not the polite, distant expression she'd grown accustomed to, but a real smile that reached his eyes. Morning, he said. I thought we could all work together today to clean up the storm damage. If that's all right with you, Eleanor. Of course, Eleanor said, pleased to be included in the decision-making. Tommy can help too, can't you, sweetheart? Tommy nodded eagerly, and Eleanor realized that for the first time since arriving at the ranch, she felt like part of a family rather than an employee. They spent the day working side by side, clearing fallen branches, checking for damage to the outbuildings, and securing anything that had been loosened by the wind. Eleanor found herself laughing at James's dry observations about the storm's mischief, and she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Tommy was in his element, important with his small tasks and basking in the attention of both adults. As the day wore on, Eleanor began to see glimpses of the man James must have been before grief and responsibility had weighed him down. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Tommy made an announcement that surprised them both. I want Eleanor to stay forever, he said matter-of-factly, cutting into his chicken with the serious concentration of a 5-year-old. James nearly choked on his water. Tommy, she tells good stories and she's not scared of storms, and she makes the house smell like cookies, Tommy continued, oblivious to his father's discomfort. And she doesn't go away. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm, but she was touched by the boy's simple acceptance of her place in their lives. I'm not planning on going anywhere, Tommy. Promise? Tommy asked, the same question he'd asked during the storm. Eleanor glanced at James, who was studying his plate with unusual intensity. I promise, she said softly. After Tommy was tucked into bed that night, Eleanor found James on the front porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. The air was cool and clean after the storm, carrying the scent of wet earth and new growth. Mind if I join you? Eleanor asked. James gestured to the chair beside him. It's your porch too. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods, the soft hoot of an owl. He's never asked anyone to stay before, James said finally. Not since his mother died. He's a special boy, Eleanor said. You've done a wonderful job with him. James shook his head. I've done my best, but it hasn't been enough. He needs more than I know how to give. He needs love, Eleanor said. And he has that. Everything else can be learned. James turned to look at her, his expression serious in the moonlight. What about you, Eleanor? What do you need? The question caught her off guard. In all her 19 years, no one had ever asked her what she needed. At the orphanage, survival had been the only goal. The idea that her wants and needs might matter to someone was almost overwhelming. Eleanor struggled to find the words. I need to belong somewhere, to matter to someone. I've never had that before. You matter to Tommy, James said quietly. And you matter to me. Eleanor's heart skipped. Do I? James was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. When I sent for a wife, I thought I was looking for someone to help with the practical things. Cooking, cleaning, watching Tommy. I thought I could keep my heart out of it. And now? Eleanor asked, barely breathing. Now I realize that was foolish, James said. You can't share a home with someone, watch them care for your child, see their kindness and strength every day, and not feel something. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I feel something too, she whispered. I didn't expect to, but I do. James reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I loved Tommy's mother very much, he said. When she died, I thought that was it for me. I thought I'd used up my capacity for love, but Eleanor prompted. But you've shown me that the heart is bigger than I thought, James said. And there's room for more than one kind of love, more than one chance at happiness. Eleanor squeezed his hand, feeling the last of her walls crumble. I was so scared when I came here, she admitted. I thought I'd always be alone, always be unwanted. You're not alone, James said firmly. And you're very much wanted. By both of us. They talked until the early hours of the morning, sharing stories of their pasts, their fears, their hopes for the future. Eleanor told James about her childhood at the orphanage, about the loneliness and the constant feeling of being temporary in everyone's life. James spoke about his late wife, about the guilt he'd carried for wanting to move forward, about his fears of failing Tommy. As the sun began to rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor realized that she'd found something she'd never dared to hope for. Not just a home, but a family. A place where she belonged, where she was needed and wanted for who she was, not just what she could provide. Eleanor, James said as they prepared to go inside, I know this isn't how either of us expected things to go, but would you be willing to try? To see if we can build something real together? Eleanor smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. I'd like that very much. As they entered the house, they found Tommy sitting on the stairs in his nightshirt, rubbing sleepy eyes. Are you and Papa friends now? He asked Eleanor with the directness of childhood. Eleanor looked at James, who smiled and nodded. Yes, sweetheart, she said. We're friends. Tommy considered this gravely, then reached out and took Eleanor's hand in his small one. Good, he said. I was hoping you'd stay with us. And as Eleanor looked down at the little boy who had first shown her what it meant to be wanted, and then at the man who had taught her that love could grow in the most unexpected places, she knew that she had finally found her home. The months that followed were filled with the small joys and challenges of building a life together. Eleanor threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, adding touches of warmth and beauty that had been missing. She planted a garden, hung curtains in the windows, and filled the rooms with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Tommy blossomed under the attention of two loving adults, his shy nature giving way to the natural exuberance of childhood. He helped Eleanor in the garden, learned to read with her patient guidance, and regaled them both with elaborate stories about his adventures around the ranch. James, meanwhile, began to let down the walls he'd built around his heart. He shared more of himself with Eleanor, his dreams for the ranch, his memories of his late wife, his hopes for Tommy's future. And slowly, carefully, they began to build something new together. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of awkwardness as they navigated their changing relationship, times when the ghosts of the past seemed to intrude on their present happiness. But they faced these challenges together, with honesty and patience and a growing trust in each other. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching Tommy chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, James took Eleanor's hand. "I have something to ask you," he said. His voice serious. Eleanor's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "What is it?" "When we married, it was a business arrangement," James said. "But that's not what this is anymore, is it?" "No," Eleanor said softly. "It's not. Then I'd like to ask you properly," James said, turning to face her. "Eleanor Whitmore Crawford, will you marry me? Not for convenience or necessity, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Eleanor felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Tommy, who had been eavesdropping from the yard, let out a whoop of delight and came running up to the porch. "Does this mean Eleanor is really my mama now?" he asked. Eleanor looked down at the little boy who had stolen her heart from the very beginning, and then at the man who had shown her what love could be. "If you want me to be," she said. Tommy threw his arms around her waist. "I want you to be my mama forever and ever." And as Eleanor held the child who had first asked her to stay, surrounded by the love she'd never dared to dream of, she knew that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simplest questions from the smallest voices. The silent orphan bride had found her voice, her home and her family in the most unexpected way. Sometimes all it takes is one small hand reaching out in trust to change everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales from the Old West, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What moment in this story moved you the most? We'd love to hear from you.